Victoria Schaefer, HFTP Senior Membership Manager, alongside Carl Weldon, HFTP's Chief Operations Officer in Europe, and our special guest, Javier Delgado Muerza, Chief Commercial and Digital Officer for Group Iberostar. Before we begin, I will quickly go over a few items about today's broadcast and Zoom platform. First, this is a conversation, and your input is important and encouraged. Your microphone is muted at this time to avoid background noise. However, please unmute your microphone at any time or use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen to share comments and questions. HFTP Hangouts are educational discussions offered in a non-sales environment. Product promotion and sales pitches in the presentation or through the chat feature are not allowed. Also, HFTP's antitrust statement has been posted in the chat. We do have a code of conduct which we require everybody to follow on HFTP Hangouts. We are monitoring the chat box and we'll call on you to ask your question for the group, or we may ask on your behalf. Our intent is to respond to all questions, but if we cannot, we'll try to follow up with a response through email. If you need technical assistance, please submit a chat and we'll be happy to help. This Hangout is being recorded, and a link to the recording of the discussion will be available at the HFTP website soon. After Carl's introduction, we will begin the conversation and we will open things up for discussion and questions towards the end. Again, interaction is encouraged and we want to have a great conversation. Carl, over to you.
Thank you, Victoria, and hello again, everyone, and welcome. As most of you know, we have created these Hangouts especially for our European members and stakeholders every other Wednesday, normally at 3 p.m. UK time, 4 p.m. Central European time, and just in time for our US members early on as they enjoy their morning coffee, and after the US move their clocks back 2 weeks ahead of Europe just to throw us a curveball. This is our 23rd HFTP European Hangout. We have a planned program of topics on an internationally wide basis with the aim that these conversations and Hangouts will help enrich everyone in the current environment. This is the 14th European Hangout of this season, and our planned set of topics curated by my small Hangouts advisory board of Ian Miller, Michael Hayward, Lewis Delomo, Timo Ketton, and Henry Rollings. So a big shout out to them. These topics will be including 2 weeks from now, 31st of March, we will meet up with Chris Fung, CEO at Lunch.co, a tech startup, to discuss the startup landscape in hospitality, as Chris is also involved with 9 other startups who is well into the landscape. We will have a 3-way discussion with a CFO, a CIO, and a leading consultant, 2 of whom are on the call today, from our advisory board on dealing with the multiple different brands from a technology point of view in a multi-franchised hotel world in Europe. We will have hospitality support initiative for the new normal. The most critical aspect to making hospitality rebound is trust from the guest. So this session will be about technological solutions and focused on elements which will address and solve just that with Kees van Donk. And because it has come up a number of times in a few different ways in previous Hangouts, we will also discuss middleware and solving the challenge of integration issues for hospitality with John Owen of Tiger TMS. And then finalizing our program with a specific Hangout for Europe at the end of June in conjunction with HMI and the European Hotel Managers Association and our friend Natalie. Now, you may have noticed there's a gap in there from late May to June, when we will be bringing you 5 weekly consecutive installments in a series we are now calling HFTP Europe 2021 sessions on 5 key topics curated by our High Tech Europe 2021 Advisory Council headed by Ian Miller and Timo Ketton, and starting on May the 26th. And more about this a bit later on. I should also point out there are already 18 recordings from our previous Hangouts via our resources page in our Hangouts area and on the website and on our YouTube channel, especially the one with Barry Thomas of Rosewood Hotels, a Brit aboard that we did at Cyber High Tech in October. This is a great resource for everyone, and especially students studying hospitality. If, however, you have any topics or suggestions, do please let us know. So March will be interview month on Hangouts, and April and May will be Technology Challenges Month on HFTP Hangouts Europe. It's almost as if we planned it. So who will we hang out today with? So we will be chatting with Javier Delgado, Chief Commercial and Digital Officer of Iberostar Group, I'm asking him a series of questions to start with to discover what he does and how indeed he does it. But you can join in too. So please ask your questions in the chat so Victoria and I can see them and bring them in when ready. Now, Javier joined hospitality from a background in Google and Expedia. At Google, he was head of vertical search and EMEA strategic accounts. And before that at Expedia, where he was head of business development and also, intriguingly, head of transport for EMEA. Javier is very well traveled and has qualifications such as MBAs in finance and marketing with Cornell and an MBA in hospitality administration via Essex Business School. So I'm feeling just a little intimidated right now. I first met Javier in Palma, Mallorca, as part of High Tech Europe in 2019, where I must say he was most interested, accommodating and helpful in talking to myself and Luis de Loma about high tech. So essentially, I will be asking him how he's found hospitality and obviously discuss the current challenges for a truly international hotel business. So to start, Javier, welcome and thank you very much indeed for joining us today.
Thank you, Carl. It's my pleasure to be here, meeting all of you. I think some of you have met already in one of the meetings mentioned, I think the one in Palma. It's great to see familiar faces on the screen. Yeah.
Excellent. So before we start, Javier, specifically, tell us a bit about Iberostar and its operations and, you know, how far you stretch across the world.
Sure. Well, Iberostar, it's a family-owned company, and I refer to this in first instance because it's really important. We are the fourth generation of a family that has been in business since 1877. They started with the shoemaking industry at the late 19th century, and then that evolved through time into travel and eventually into hotels. The company has been into the travel business for over 80 years now, and in hotels for about 40 years now. Currently, we operate about 110 hotels in 20 countries. We have two major hubs, which are summer sun destinations in the Mediterranean and the Caribbean, even though we have operations in a few other places. Those are the main hubs where we operate. Accounting for about 36,000 rooms, run by about 33,000 employees worldwide. The group also has a travel division, or a travel company, shall I say, which is called World to Meet, which traditionally has been the bed bank technology company and also a DMC, destination management company. And now we are about to launch, we're actually launching an airline, starting operations in about a month and a half from now, which is an interesting time to put planes in the air, I guess. So that's a bit who we are. And what we do. In terms of our footprint, we have hotels from the Pacific coast of Mexico, think about Punta Mita, for example, and then going all the way east to Tunisia. But as I said, our main hubs of operation are the Mediterranean, with some concentration, I would say, in the Canary Islands, in the Balearic Islands, in the Spanish mainland coast, Morocco, Tunisia. We also operate hotels in Portugal. We have a few urban properties like New York, Madrid, Barcelona, Lisbon, and Miami Beach, which is kind of a hybrid sun and city destination. But our stronghold, as I said, is the Mediterranean, and obviously the Dominican Republic, Mexico, where we have about 5,000 rooms, Brazil, and Cuba. That's basically who we are.
And that's all you do. Well, wow, going into the airline business, wow, that's moving on a bit. So I think given your background in major digital players such as Google and Expedia, I think the first thing I'd like to ask you is, what was your initial reaction to the hotel industry and the wider Iberostar when you joined? What shocked you, if you like, and what impressed you when you came into the business?
Sure. Well, I was somehow already acquainted with the hotel industry. I went to hotel school myself prior to completing my MBA degree and postgraduate school. Worked in hotels during my hotel school years, then worked in a tour operator and Iberia Airlines prior to joining Expedia. So I had been in contact, and then at Expedia, obviously, I was working with hotels, and at Google, I was working with large travel companies, including hotels. So throughout my professional life, I had been in contact with hotels all along. Now, and I was a heavy user. I was doing 120, 130 hotel nights per year for the last 15 years. So I thought I knew hotels well, but it is true that the perspective changes completely as a user versus an operator. So what shocked me probably the most is, well, first of all, the passion that hoteliers, hoteliers have for their product. We are all, now that I am a hotelier, I'm wearing that hat. We are all very proud fathers or proud parents, shall I say, of our properties and our products, and we love to flaunt them and display them and talk about them, which is great. But maybe on the darker side, I would say what struck me the most is the lack of digitalization, the lack of digitization of certain aspects, and the disconnect with tech that many people have within the hotel industry, which I think it's something negative. Many people still live within the hotel industry. It's all about the food, the wine, the rooms, the linen, the beach, the service, which is obviously the fundamental piece because we're talking about hospitality, but technology is becoming part of that experience and part of that business operation. But many people think that they have nothing to do or that they shouldn't worry about technology. And that struck me substantially, especially because my previous 15 years were working at technology companies that were serving kind of the travel industry. And then from a commercial perspective, there's a certain degree of servilism towards distribution, which I had experienced in my own flesh when I was at Expedia. Obviously, Google is kind of a different story, but with Expedia, you could tell that hotels are always kind of putting the red carpet to distribution, which is great because distribution is very much needed, of course. But also one of the areas in which I've been working the most since I joined is direct distribution. Some companies are well advanced in B2C, some others are a bit farther behind. Obviously depends on where your footprint is, because we operate a hotel in Cape Verde, an archipelago south of the Canary Islands, kind of the middle of the Atlantic, where it's very difficult to do B2C sales, to put it that way. But we also operate hotels in Manhattan or downtown Barcelona, where it's relatively easier to sell direct. So that kind of lack of mentality towards selling, hotel people should be salesmen, saleswomen. Everyone should have a sales mentality, and in some cases that's lacking. So what shocked me the most is, I would say, the lack of digital skill, and also some things that in the past, in previous lives, I thought that they were very simple, but once you are wearing the hotelier hat, they become much more difficult. And I kind of understood many of the problems that I had witnessed in the past. And a very clear example of this is the marketing versus distribution budgets, for example. It's not our case. There was a certain mentality like that, which we were able to break a few years back, but some hotels have like a fixed marketing budget for sales, let's say over SEM, Google or other platforms, but they keep their budgets open for distribution. They never stop sales to Expedia or to Booking if they have rooms available. And this comes from a mentality that there's an allocated marketing budget for direct distribution, whilst there isn't one for distribution, which when I was outside of the hotel, I said, well, this is really stupid. Why are hotels doing this? Now, once sitting on the board and discussing with the CFO and others, you realize the dynamics and the way the budgets are structured and the reporting is done, and the different dynamics and mechanics within the business prevent, in many cases, those things that are so obvious from the outside world. When you are in the inside world, to put it that way, they're sometimes tough nuts to crack. So it's moving to the other side of the fence, from distribution to operations. It is true that the lens changes completely. I'm trying to keep the best of both worlds. I don't know if I'm succeeding at that, but obviously combining the passion for the product and that pride of a parent towards the hotels is something really important. But bringing technology and getting technology embedded into day-to-day, I wouldn't say that it's important. I would say that it's urgent, given that we are in 2021. And with the shakeup that has taken place with the COVID and so forth, it's become even more important than it was before.
coming into that, and a lovely segue into the technology. Before you added the word commercial into your role, which we'll come back to in a minute, but you were, and when I first met you, I think you were Chief Digital Officer for the group. And this is becoming a new trending role in the industry, I think. But so can you describe, in your experience at least, what is the difference, say, between the Chief Digital Officer and what you might call the original classic CIO or commercial officer roles? What did you come in to do differently in that role?
Right. When I was hired, my remit was to take over IT, which was a very important part of the organization. Yep. And on top of that, build kind of a data discipline. We were really behind in some aspects. We were in the dark ages of data. We had a very simple BO, business intelligence infrastructure, which was mined in maybe not in the optimal way. So the CEO asked me to take on and bring data into life within our company. So I had to combine and maybe refine or accelerate some of the IT aspects that we had in the company and enrich all of that with data. And that was actually my focus for about 8 months, after which, because of different business decisions that were taken in the company, the family that owns the company entrusted me also the commercial piece. And the reason behind that was that we realized, and we discussed a few times, that data together with technology was more and more important in order to succeed commercially. So additional to that, I had some background in sales within Google and Expedia, so I knew some of the commercial mechanics. But the reason why we combined both roles at the time was to make sure that we made the most of our distribution, of our capabilities, by combining those three ingredients: the tech, the data, and all the commercial aspects and the commercial teams. So that's how it kind of came to life. How does it differ from traditional CIO roles, which is what you mentioned in your question? I think that in many cases, CIOs have been portrayed, or they have incarnated just the normal evolution of an IT manager that has evolved through the ranks of the company, eventually made it to the C-suite and become the person who's responsible for IT, IT and systems infrastructure, which is the foundation. It's really important for the company. But I believe that the new digital office has to be completely embedded within the business. So it's no longer talking about technology, which remains important, but to a great extent, it's becoming more and more of a commodity. Is how do you combine the technology with the services and with the data to make sense and from a commercial perspective, and to gain an edge versus competitors, versus the distribution in some cases, and especially to provide a better experience to the user. So more than the traditional IT role, I think it's the combination of all those aspects and being able to synthesize what's required and what can be done and what cannot be done, which is even more important, I would say, and really bring that to life with operations and with the commercial teams. Because at the end of the day, we are in the service industry. We are not in pure IT. We're not manufacturing. This is not goods. This is services. So it's human to human. And that's what makes the difference. We enjoy very high return rates. Our loyalty levels are really high in the company, and that's because of the service. And you can never change the smile or a thank you or a nice service provided by a reception, by a chef, by a maitre d'. That's always going to be, the human touch is fundamental. But if you're able to empower all of those services with data and technology, it can be much more powerful than it is without them. But the true essence is the service, because we're in the human to human industry. So that's something that remains really important.
So I guess you could say in some ways, because I know that the phrase shadow IT or shadow IT department, normally working in marketing, you actually had IT and shadow IT working for you at one stage.
Of course, shadow IT is a big topic in the industry, as you know, and shadow IT. This is a generalism, but to a great extent, shadow IT is the result of the incompetence of the IT departments, because IT should be solving the business problems, the business, whatever that is, if it's finance or legal or whomever it is that has a business issue that they need to resolve. If the IT department is unable to do so, they go to the market and they find their own solutions and they contract those solutions to solve the problem that they have. So then it becomes a problem because the official IT department, to put it that way, needs to cope and needs to manage with all those infrastructure or systems or contracts that have been signed or done or implemented outside of their realm of responsibility, to put it that way. Now, and we have shadow IT like everyone else. I'm not saying that we are perfect, by no means. But the point is, if IT is doing their job right, they should prevent all the shadow IT from happening again in an ideal world. But the world is complex, and especially when you operate in many different countries throughout different languages, different currencies, different regulations, sometimes it's just unavoidable, and you need to have it. Now you need to minimize it, and you need to have some form of government of what a shadow IT should or shouldn't be. But again, in my thinking, technology should be at the service of the business, always. And that's an axiom that everyone should understand in the company. And it is when technology is not at the service of the business that in many cases we get this shadow IT mushrooms, mushrooming all over the place.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So you're trying to bring the shadow IT out of the shadows, essentially.
Yeah.
Do you like that? See what I did there? Okay. Now, the word commercial was added to your title a couple of years ago, and as you said, after 8 or 9 months, and the owners asked you to lead the sales efforts as part of that. Now, most of the CIOs or IT directors, some of whom are on this call, would pay a lot of money not to have anything to do with sales. And I know a lot of sales directors who would do their best to avoid technology. So how the heck do you actually manage to bring those two disciplines together under your control or under your direction?
Let me start by saying that I'm not sure that I have things under control. I try at least I pretend. Now, it is true that it's very difficult, especially because I do not come from an IT background. I've not been coding. I'm not an engineer myself, which in many cases, or it tends to be the typical pattern that you have within IT. In my previous life at Google, I did manage some of the engineer teams, some of the most capable engineering teams at Google. That kind of helped me understand the way engineers and IT people work. And actually, it's by decoding business to IT people and decoding IT to business people. I think that role is going to become increasingly important, helping organizations, especially the business side, decipher what IT can and cannot do. Many people think that everything can be done with IT, which to a great extent is true, but it's going to have a cost, first of all. If there's going to be time involved, and things don't happen just on the blink of an eye. And then on the other side, the IT people tend to not really care about what happens down the road because of business decisions that are made from an IT perspective. For example, there was a business decision made in our company a few years ago related with IPTVs, which at the time was a big thing, and there was a lot of hype, and they could provide a great experience, but they required all of the wiring and and certain things from a hardware perspective, from an FNF&E perspective, that were really costly, and then they were difficult to maintain, and there were some problems with the guest experience. And that was the perfect example of decisions that were made from an IT standpoint that were not connected with the business or with the guest experience. Again, this is not a finger-pointing exercise that happened before my time at Iberostar, but some decisions were made which required significant CapEx and OpEx that was actually growing through time and not contributing for a better experience and not contributing for greater efficiencies. So that's just one example of how things happen when you don't have someone that is trying to shepherd the different teams. The way I try to do my work is not by imposing roadmaps or by saying this is the way. It's more of a shepherd trying to move the herd. So this is where, that's the direction we want to go to. Maybe we need to take a few turns. Maybe we need to be careful with that river, with that creek. But let's try to get there by collectively moving as if we were a herd to look for a parallelism in nature.
So we're using geography to manage IT now. I love that. So one of the questions that related to something you were just talking about just now is that the new term or the job title of data scientist or a data scientist department. Do you have them in Iberostar? Do you see a future with data scientists within the business?
The answer is yes. This is actually one of the first divisions that I created, which was a pun, because data in Spanish translates to dato. So we use the acronym Data Analytics and Transformation Office, which equals to dato, which means piece of data in Spanish, and created, first of all, a centralization of all the data activities, shall I say, within the company. We were a company that was, in these 30, 40 years we've been operating hotels, we had two very distinct realities. We had the Americas, very strong in the Caribbean, and we had the European operations mainly in the Mediterranean. And those were two complete separate worlds. They had separate data infrastructures, they had separate PMSs, they had separate IT divisions, you name it. Everything was completely separated and siloed by design. About a year and a half prior to my arrival to the company decided to merge the regions and become a truly global company. Now, this is very easy to do on the PowerPoint. Either if it's a McKinsey PowerPoint or a Deloitte PowerPoint or your own PowerPoint, you can paint the names and the graphs and the boxes and everything beautiful, and you walk out the door and then hell breaks loose, right? Because nothing works, people hate each other. Some of the processes have been designed to prevent things from happening and so forth. Just to give you an example, I found this as worrying as riveting upon joining the company. We had in our BO infrastructure 93 different universes of data, which meant everyone, whenever they had to do a report or to create a certain metric, they created their own universe. And they wouldn't give access to other people to that universe. So what would that requester do? They would create another universe, right? Which became impossible to manage because you had 93 truths. I'm exaggerating, but you get the point. It was very difficult to have a clean and neat ADR, global ADR, taxes included, commissions excluded. How is ADR defined? RevPAR, RevPAR, a number of things that were measured in different ways. So one of the first decisions that I took on arrival was to centralize and break all these silos and actually to take all that data and throw it to the bin and rebuild it from scratch. Wow. Which was very difficult, painful and costly. Painful, difficult, and costly. Now, once we had that kind of, I wouldn't say managed, but stabilized and with some solid foundations, we started adding those roles that you're mentioning of data scientists. And we started doing some of the fun stuff, some of the sexiest stuff. Now, with data science, I heard the joke about programmatic when I was at Google, which I think applies to data scientists as well, which is, it's like teenage sex. Everyone claims they're doing it, but they're not. When they try it, it's messy, difficult, and disappointing, right? So I think that's a great joke that describes what's happening with data scientists, because many people say, yeah, we're doing that or we're doing this, but it's either it's not really true or the outcome is not really what you expect. With that said, we've been able to develop a few basic things because we want to go slow now to go faster in the future. Every step we take, we're trying to be very careful. We're trying to get the basics very right until we have that, that strong, rock solid basement that we can build upon. Then we're going to start doing more things on top.
Fascinating. We've had a question come in, but I was going to ask you a similar question based a little bit on my experience. So I think it must be just over a year ago at Fiture in 2020, I visited you on the Iberostar stand. And of course, I noticed that your stand majored on sustainability. You had that one huge wall which showed the whole Iberostar journey. You showed me the video room with showing the different effects of some of your programs on sustainability that Iberostar have taken. Of course, you've employed Megan, who now works with us in the High Tech Europe 2021 Advisory Board as a Director of Sustainability. Can you just give us a bit of background in terms of, from your point of view, because you haven't been there in the scheme of things that long in their history, how you've seen the sustainability come along, how it's developing, and to some extent how, and given last Hangout, how you see the technology helping sustainability?
Sure. So sustainability is really at the heart of what we do. And many people may think, wait a minute, you're talking about the 2,000 room resort on the very edge of the sea or on the beach, which is not necessarily, or one of those matchboxes hotels that you have in Mallorca. That's not really sustainable. That shock, we face it a lot. But you need to understand where we come from. So we are a family-owned business with a great sense of responsibility. Generations, fourth generation, with literally tens of thousands of employees worldwide working for a common goal. Always related to the sea. We come from Mallorca, and if you know Mallorcans, which I know you do know well, Carl, they're very interesting people. In Mallorca, all the wealth has come from the sea by definition because it's an island, and they've been conquered by different cultures through time, right? So the sea is a very important part of that. So respect for the sea has been fundamental in this company. The location of our hotels is, apart from the city hotels, obviously, we're always right, in premium locations next to the sea. So we depend very much on the sea, on the ocean, to do our living. It is true that the family has had a very strong focus to make wave of change, that adds from a scientific perspective. It is true that, more than a marketing thing, this is a scientific effort. That's why we brought Megan, who happens to be a PhD from Stanford in coral life and other disciplines. So someone who has a very strong scientific background. And we want to leverage all of that knowledge to take advantage of Iberostar strengths and contribute to the solution that the oceans, the biggest problems that the oceans have. And we do that by focusing on three key pillars. One of them is moving beyond plastic and moving to circular economy. We have one hotel already that it's completely circular, meaning that all the waste that it generates is controlled and nothing goes to landfill. Everything goes into the system again. So we are very serious about this. This is not about just removing the straws, the plastic straws, which is great. We did that many years ago, and many people are following suit, and we are very pleased. But it's not about that. It's really going already to circularity. For example, we've put weights on our kitchens, not to weight the raw food, but to weight all the waste that goes to the bins. We have cameras that interpret, how much is vegetables, how much is meat, how much is, to really understand what we are doing within the chain, within the ecosystem. So moving beyond plastic and going to circular economy is one of the pillars. The second one is responsible consumption of seafood, which is really, really important. Maintaining some species that shouldn't be consumed, tracing which species we're consuming, working together with the fisheries in the different countries where we operate, and buying this stuff and not buying other stuff, removing lobster from our buffets in our 5-star hotels at times because it's not the right time to consume that because nature needs to recover, and explaining that to the consumer. So the responsibility over seafood consumption is a second pillar, which is really important. And the third one is coastal health, which is making sure that the coastal ecosystems in which we operate are slowly but surely moving towards the better and not towards the worst. With that, we've done, for example, coral labs. We have coral labs we've opened the second one in the Dominican Republic in cooperation with the university and local authorities to make sure that we protect as much as we can, and we raise the awareness of the people that stay with us and also the local communities about the importance of preserving the local, not only local beauty, but the local wealth that we have. So that's what we were trying to portray in Fitur, which is one of the trade shows, and where most of you are familiar with, similar to a ITB or WTM. We're trying to explain the world, what makes us different, and why are we doing all of this. And in many cases, it's a matter of taking the high road, because in many cases, it's more costly to have crystal bottles and crystal glasses instead of plastic glasses. And sometimes you need to explain to the client why we're not serving X food versus Y food. But it's paying off because we see more and more recognition. We have actually introduced the wave of change NPS, Net Promoter Score, in our CSAT, in our customer satisfaction systems, to see if people perceive and if they understand. And it's moving in the right direction, even though it's costing us quite some money. We think it's the right thing to do in the long run, even though the pressure on margins are very high and ever increasing, but especially in 2020, if you're lucky enough to have positive margin, or in 2021, you need to count every dime. But here we are invested in this for the long run, and we operate about 66% of the rooms we operate, they're owned by us. So that makes things easier to implement.
Yeah.
We apply, 100% kind of a common approach to all the properties we operate. But when you are the operator and the owner, you can much easier implement certain things or undertake certain CapEx decisions than when you are not the owner.
And how do you see the technology supporting those three pillars, Javier?
Well, greatly. As I mentioned to you, for example, we are in the process of putting all these weight machines in our kitchens to measure what's going out of the kitchen. But more importantly, to interpret why is that happening? Why do we have, a surplus of pineapples in these hotels in these certain months? What's the like or dislike of certain audiences? What happens if we change cod for other similar kind of fish? Do people like it more or like it less? So connecting all the data that we collect in the kitchens with our customer profile, their liking or disliking, their repeat ratios, and so forth, all of that has to happen through technology necessarily. Yeah. All of our paperless operations, which has a lot to do with this. We removed all paper operations, for example, from the housekeeping department. Housekeeping department is huge for us. We're talking about thousands of people, most of which have been running, the clean room or stay room or checkout room, check-in rooms on pieces of paper with different color codings. All of that has moved to tablets. By that, we can much faster, first of all, measure productivity, capture what's happening in the hotels from Palma. Some of our hotels are 10,000 kilometers away from the HQ. Understanding what's happening there on a paper and pencil environment is more difficult than in a digital environment. So we're just pushing for that to happen. All of the check-in operations do take place now on tablets, collecting the name, the signatures, and all the rest of it. So it's a collective effort, and technology is at the heart of it. The problem is that technology, as most of you know in this call, is expensive. And rolling out things globally when you operate we have a hotel which is a floating hotel in the Amazon River. It's the only boat in the Amazon River. So when you need to put things in place in the middle of the Amazon, or in a hotel in Mexico that has just been hit by a hurricane, and you're running things on the cloud, which is very fancy, but if there's no communication with the cloud, it's difficult to run certain aspects.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
yeah.
It's not easy, but to your question, technology plays a fundamental role in the business transformation that we are doing, and circularity and responsible tourism, which is the way we like to call it, is a fundamental piece, and they both need each other.
Fascinating. We had a session on sustainability 2 weeks ago, but we never got as far as the F&B area. So you've actually almost added on to that whole discussion we had 2 weeks ago. Fantastic. we must, of course, Javier, discuss the current situation or the last 12 months. What have been the main challenges for you in Iberostar, and how are you now feeling coming out of the pandemic, brackets, apart from opening an airline, close brackets? And what are, I mean, you've alluded to some, but and what are some of those regional differences that you're discovering? Because the impression I get is that different parts of the world are in different stages. We were discussing the difference between Spain and the UK. I mean, you must be seeing it across the world. So talk us through, you know, Javier's pandemic in the last 12 months, so to speak.
Well, I've lost a lot of hair. You know, if you talked to me 12 months ago, I would have much more hair, and this is no joke. It's been literally hell. We've been living through hell. Sometime this time last year, about the 17th of March, the world came to standstill, and we all know what happened. Q1 was actually pretty decent, a pretty decent quarter for us. You know, we were, I think, slightly over budget from a revenue perspective. The year was looking just fine, and everyone was happy. Then Q2 broke loose, and I think we did zero revenue. Zero, you know, complete zero, because the world was stopped. I mean, no one could travel. You couldn't even leave your apartments in some parts of the world, like Spain. And we all know what happened, right? Then in Q3, we started opening towards the end of Q2, actually, in a very shy and prudent manner, opening a few hotels here and there. And the response was pretty good, I would say, in July. And then in August, it seemed like things were really going to take off. But then the nightmare broke again, because the Germans stopped traveling. The English stopped traveling. For both of those markets for us are key in Europe, as you may imagine, if we operate in the Spanish archipelagos and the Spanish mainland and Greece and Tunisia and so forth, like we do. So it's been a very bumpy, it's been a bit of a roller coaster. Then from a geography perspective, the virus moved from the east to the west. This virus came from China, it hit Italy first, and then it started spreading kind of all over Europe, and about 2-3 months later got to the Americas, where it hit pretty bad Mexico and a few other countries until it became just a global pandemic that we're in. The reality has been very different, and it has a lot to do with politics, and I would say with the zeitgeist of the regions in the outgoing regions in which we operate. Mexico, well, the biggest surprise by far has been Brazil. Brazil, even though it's very badly hit by the virus, it never really stopped traveling. We closed the hotels for a few months, but then we opened our hotels again. And they've been enjoying, you know, great occupancy rates at very healthy ADRs, even though the country was at the worst point, the lowest points of the valley from a virus perspective. The hotels were still running, which is good. But completely, you know, no one understands why that happened. Then Mexico lately is doing fantastic, is doing very, very good. It was severely hit, and Mexico had been hit by the sargassum and the insecurity issues that the country has by definition. Unfortunately, it is what it is. But then it's coming back very strongly, and that has a lot to do with the US, which is the key outgoing market. Everyone, or not everyone, but you know, they're vaccinating at a very, very healthy pace. And some people never really lost the faith of travel, and they kept on traveling. The Dominican Republic had its own issues before the pandemic started, because of reputation problems, because of some security problems, the sargassum as well. And it's been probably hit the worst in the Caribbean. It's now starting to come back to life. It seems like the government is doing a fantastic job. Many people are vaccinated by now. They are vaccinating everyone free of charge, similar to what the US is doing. And they're putting a strong focus on tourism, which is a big contributor to the GDP of the country. And it's starting, you know, to come back pretty strongly. Then Cuba is a whole different story altogether. It's more or less defending itself, I would say. If we move to Europe it shut down, it opened again, we had to close, then we opened a few hotels, and for months, we have had all of our hotels closed in Europe, which is something we never ever experienced. In some hotels, one of our flagship hotels, I would say, the Cristina in Playa de Palma, close to Palma de Mallorca, the city center. When we wanted to close it down, we didn't have the key because no one ever closed that hotel. We had to put a door because it had never been closed. It's very funny, but it's really tragic at the same time. Yeah. So we've been operating with hotels closed completely. Actually, now we only have one hotel open in the Canary Islands in Tenerife with the Antalya, with very limited occupancy rates. And we are now about to open 2-3 hotels in the Balearics, following the announcement made by the German authorities that it is safe to travel to the Balearics and so forth. So basically, it's been just a horrible nightmare that no one had never ever been prepared for, that no one really saw coming. I must say that I didn't see the length or the depth of this tragedy. And in my case specifically, I come from hyper-growth blue chip companies that have been growing like this for the last 15 years. So it was more managing the growth and trying not to hit, like driving a Ferrari at 300 kilometers per hour, where you're just trying not to hit a wall. Much rather than now preserving cash and trying to keep the boat afloat. So the mentality and the way you operate is completely different from driving super fast cars to trying to keep the boat afloat. So a real nightmare with many regional differences. We all hope that the recovery is going to come fast and being a consequence of the health and the medical recovery of society. I think there's a lot of pent-up demand. People want to travel. People need to travel. And that's just going to blossom and flourish as soon as it's safe to do so. It is true that some countries maybe rolled back the measures too early because we didn't really know how difficult it was to fight this war or this game. We've learned a lot through the process, but the thing is, no one really had a logbook as how to navigate this. You have guides to pre-open a hotel. You have many things in the business world have been defined or worked on for decades, if not centuries. But running a hotel company and all of a sudden being hit by a pandemic, no business school prepares you for that, unfortunately or fortunately.
As I think one of our advisory board, Timo, said, he's become expert at opening and closing hotels in the last 6 months. Yeah. Just a question. Talking to some IT people, IT directors, some of them have taken the opportunity while the hotels were closed or not open much to relook at what they had, look at, maybe change some things and should we say get organized. I mean, the basic, taking the chance to defrag the hard drive was maybe a good way of putting it, while you're not operating. Did you take that opportunity? Did you see certain opportunities and find things you were able to do because the business wasn't running at 100 miles an hour?
At least that's what we like to think. We've been focusing on efficiency a lot, which was very much needed. And it is true that in these situations is when you need to sharpen the pencil the most. As we say in Spanish, el hambre agudiza el ingenio, which means when you are hungry, you really become much more creative in the way you do business, right? And we've been trying to follow that. Now, we're very conscious at the same time that this, we are here for the long run. And we are a 4th generation company. So we've been here since the 19th century. So we're thinking about, 2080. No, we're not thinking about 2021. And we understand that to get there in a healthy way, we need to invest in IT. We're actually protecting our IT budgets, and we are willing, we have approved budgets to keep the same investment levels as we had in 2019, which is pre-COVID. Probably not on the same things that we're investing, and the CapEx and the OpEx are going to move around into different things, but at least the executive committee has been able to agree that this is a pivotal part of the business, that in some aspects we need to accelerate decisions that had been made, that now need to be made much faster. The migration to the cloud, the last few remaining pieces that were not migrated have been migrated. We've taken some few bold decisions about migrating systems to new platforms that we could not have done in the past. Also renewing and investing in some infrastructure problems that we had that are very difficult to cope with when you have the hotels open. So yes, to a great extent, I think we've been brave enough to take some decisions that we hope will pay for down the road. But you should ask me these questions 3-4 years from now to see if those decisions were wise or not. I think they were, or they've been. But we will see. And the fact that we are keeping the investment levels from an overall perspective on the budget versus 2019, I think it's a very strong message.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, if anybody on the call has another question for Javier, please do let us know in the chat. But Javier, your hopes for the future of our industry in a wider sense. I think you're involved with something called the WEF Industry Action Group. You're involved in the industry over and above Iberostar a little bit. How do you see the future of our industry in the wider global sense?
I am optimistic by definition, and I think the travel industry is going to bounce back stronger than ever and much better than ever before. People are going to travel more, not less, going forward. Maybe the destinations are going to change a bit for a while. Probably yes. But air capacity is a great way of gauging where things are going from a long-term perspective, because aircraft takes years to develop and to build and so forth. And that pipeline pre-COVID was super healthy, meaning that there were many planes on the pipeline coming to the market. It's been halted by definition, but still pre-COVID it had doubled, I believe, from 2012 to 2018. Then the number of flights, if I get the number right, it went from 400,000 to 800,000 daily flights worldwide. And there's a lot of capacity coming through. That, the 737 MAX and all the different crises that the aircraft industry has had will be overcome. All that capacity is going to come online eventually, which means there's going to be more and more people traveling. We are seeing hotel investment at the highest levels, despite the COVID. Maybe the prices are going down, maybe some things are going to take longer to build. If you look at the OTAs, the market cap of the Expedias and the bookings of the world, they are at the peaks. During this period, Airbnb went public. It has tripled its value since it floated. It's now at around $200 trading, and it floated at 70 or 68, something like that. So by all measures, travel is going to come back. Things are going to change. Yes, some of the changes are going to be permanent. I also agree with that. But travel is going to come back, and it's going to be a better travel industry, more efficient. Some people are going to die and are not going to make it to the other side of the pond. Unfortunately, that's the way it is, and every industry has to go through these kind of natural storms. And it's sad that we have to face it, but I think travel can only come back. From a World Economic Forum perspective, I do participate in this action group, and the situation is pretty tragic because it's been over 200 million jobs lost in the travel industry worldwide. And in some communities, this is extremely impactful because of the impact it has on the communities and the local people and the well-being of those communities. But it should bounce back as quickly as it disappeared. And that's where the World Economic Forum, that's what we are working on. The WTTC is also doing a great job at lobbying with the countries to make sure that this comes back. And I think the biggest problem there is the politics that get involved. And we've seen that the European Union is not that much of a union when it comes to regulations from the vaccine perspective. And I don't want to get into politics, but the Brexit and the vaccines and the crisis, and you see French coming to party to Madrid, which is not good, but this is a consequence of the regulations. All of that needs to be treated and managed in a much faster and better way. Getting these health passports in place, which only now they're talking about, they seem to start being ready, 13 months after this whole thing started, is very worrying. But I think we will get our act together as an industry and as a society. And when we bounce back, boy, that's going to be one hell of a ride.
Javier, that's an hour disappeared right in front of my eyes. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for giving us your time and your insights. Really appreciated it. Really enjoyed talking with you. I'm really sorry we can't be in Mallorca right now having the chat, but I'm sure we will do in the future. Javier, thank you very much indeed. Before I hand back to Victoria, I'd just like to remind you our next Hangout is on Wednesday, the 31st of March, when I'll be chatting with Chris Fung, CEO of Lunch.co, and who's also involved with 9 other startups. Victoria, back to you to sign us out. You're on mute, Victoria.
I got it. Thank you, Carl and Javier, and thanks to everyone for joining the Europe Hangout today. Before we close, remember that HFTP is hosting Europe Hangouts next on Wednesday, the 31st of March, when Carl will be talking to Chris Fung, CEO of Lunch.co. Also, please don't forget High Tech Live in Dallas on the 27th through 30th of September later this year. This closes today's HFTP Europe Hangout, and we will see you at the next one. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Javier.
Thanks very much. Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. It was really insightful. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.